Okay. So anyway, I'll keep an eye on that in case somebody else shows up, but as long as you're here, we'll do just your problem. So we know the quiz, can you see Claudia?
Yeah.
We know the quiz is gonna have 2 problems. And we know one of them is going to look like this.
Good, I wish you were here.
And I don't have any idea how this is gonna come out because I'm just making it up.
I don't have F and G today. Yeah?
Whatever I got.
Come on, G.
All right, so I don't have any idea. Let's just see what happens. All right, so what do we do with the problem that we know we're gonna have on our quiz that looks like this? What do we do?
Divide.
No, we change each one of them into a fraction. Okay, so do you have your sheet memorized yet?
No.
Okay, we'll get it out then, because you're gonna need it.
I don't think I got one to begin with. Yeah, if you forget it, if you forget, it's okay.
These 8 right here. So look at those 8, and what do you think? Yes, Mrs.
The
Clark.
chickens are ramping up.
Oh, are they? We're on video. Just wanted to let you know.
And that's fine. Yeah, I'm not.
Here's Mrs. Mills.
For the last 2 days, I've got 7 eggs. So
Oh,
I'll bring you a
wow.
dozen eggs
See,
in this
warm
week.
weather.
It's spring's coming. What that means? That's what it means. Springs are coming.
All right, so cosecant squared is what? What's cosecant? Look at the first 5. What's cosecant?
1 over sine.
So you're at 1 over sine squared. Because it's squared, you just make it squared, okay? What's secant?
1 over cosine.
1 over cosine. All right, what's cotangent?
Cosine over sine.
All right, so that's cosine squared over sine squared. Okay, now when you have cosines and sines, you don't change those, they just stay the same. So cosine over 1 and sine squared over 1. And I put them over 1 because see how everything here is a fraction, so just to keep things lined up, I put those over 1, but I don't rewrite them. Cosine and sine just stay cosine and sine. Okay, what's tangent?
Sine over cosine.
So I'll change that to sine over cosine. And then I'll just start canceling. Hopefully stuff will cancel. So I see a sine squared here and a sine squared here, so I'm gonna go ahead and cancel those out. You can cancel them out in any order. Just on top cancels with on bottom. So there's cosine and cosine. Now, I have a cosine on the bottom and 2 cosines here, so I can cancel out 1 of those. And then the same thing's gonna happen clear on the end down here. I have a sine and a sine squared. So that's gone, but this one of them stays. All right, does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
All right, so then I think I canceled everything. So what do I have left on the top? The only thing I have left on the top is a cosine. And the only thing I have left on the bottom is that sine. Well, what's cosine over sine? Where's your paper? What's cosine over sine?
Cotangent.
Yep. So all of that mess, that big mess that we started with, just boils down to cotangent. Okay, now you try one. Exactly that kind. There's going to be 2 kinds on the quiz. This is one kind. So let's say we have cosecant squared times cotangent times cosine times sine. Oh, let's throw in a cubed times tangent see if you can start simplifying that. What did you do with your cosecant squared?
1 over sine
Squared. Don't forget the square. Whatever the power is, you keep that. What'd you do with cotangent?
1 over tan.
Okay, now we're going to change everything into sines and cosines. So look again. What is cotangent?
Oh. 1 over. Oh, sine over cosine.
Cotangent.
Cosine over.
There we go. Cosine over sine. Now remember, when you have a cosine, you just leave it. I always put it over 1. Sine, same thing, so it's going to be sine cubed. And then tangent squared.
Sine over cosine.
Always be squared. Whatever the power is, you keep it. So that's your first step. Okay? Now, what cancels? Well, let's see. I have a sine squared here and a sine squared here. You can cancel in any order. Now, look here. You got cosine squared on the bottom, but you have 2 cosines here, so they'll cancel out completely, right? Now, I have 1 sine left on the bottom, but I have 3 of them here, so I can cancel that out, but that will leave 2 of them there. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
And I think all I have left on the top is that sine squared. And I think the entire bottom is gone. All I have left is 1 down there. So my answer is just sine squared. Now, I know you don't have your things memorized yet, so you're going to work on that. You're going to get flashcards done and work on that. But other than that, does this all make sense to you, that kind of problem?
Yes.
So when we have this big long string, we change everything into sines and cosines using the fractions that we are going to memorize, and then we just start canceling.
Okay.
Okay? All right, so that's one of the problems. Now notice that for that problem, remember you have 8 things there that you're responsible for memorizing. For that problem, we use the top 5, right? So then the other problem, we're going to use those other 3, the Pythagorean identities. So we're going to have something like, and because there's only 3 of them, there's only so many problems I can do, so I apologize if I've already done this problem. There just aren't that many. We could have something like secant cubed over 1 plus tangent squared. Now, and the job will say simplify. I mean, obviously, this doesn't even look like the other problems, right? So we're not going to get confused. This is a totally different kind of problem. When you see 1 plus tangent squared, that will stick out to you once you memorize those, because look at your paper. Don't you have one that literally says 1 plus tangent squared?
Yeah.
What is 1 plus tangent squared equal?
Secant squared.
So you're going to rewrite the denominator as secant squared, because that's what 1 plus tangent squared is. Right? And then, now it kind of does look like the last one. Now we're just going to cancel. We have 3 secants over 2 secants. So we'll cancel out, well, 2 of them, and leaving with 1 left. So the answer is just secant. That's all that's left. So another one like that might be, let's see, so again, when you read the problem, you're going to say to yourself, 1 plus cotangent squared. Well, you have that memorized. On your sheet, what does it say about 1 plus cotangent squared?
Secant squared.
Cosecant squared. Yeah, the cotangent is the cosecant squared. So this is going to be cosecant squared on the top, and then you just have a cosecant in the bottom. So what do I do now?
Cross out whatever matches.
So we have a cosecant left, because we can cancel out 1 of them.
Yeah. Thank you.
So when you have more on the top, then your leftovers on the top. If you have more on the bottom, well, we don't have one here, but then it would be like this if we had more on the bottom. All right, so let's try one more of those. Have you done your 5-1 homework yet?
Yeah.
Dirty one. How about this? Good morning. Hector, you have a quarter, we gotta get this off the board this week.
All right.
So get that taken care of. All right, so 1 minus sine squared. What's 1 minus sine squared? Now, this one's a little bit trickier because you actually don't see 1 minus sine squared, right? So what you need to remember is you do see sine squared plus cosine squared equals 1. You do see that. That's on there.
Yeah.
If you subtract sine squared from both sides, then you have a new equation that says cosine squared equals 1 minus sine squared. So it's the same equation that you have on the paper that you are going to memorize, but you can rearrange, like every equation, you can rearrange those things. So like in an equation where you say x plus y equals 5, you can move the x to the other side and say y equals 5 minus x, right? That's the same equation, it's just written in a different order. This is the same equation as you're memorizing, it's just rearranged. So 1 minus sine squared is the same as cosine squared. Now, when we were going through these in class, I asked you to write this down next to this one, just so you get in the habit of recognizing, not that you have to memorize it, although it's not bad, I mean, it's great to memorize it if you can, but you need to be in the habit of recognizing that that equation can happen this way, and other ways too, other rearrangements. So 1 minus sine squared is the same as cosine squared, so I'm going to make that cosine squared on top. Well, what happens, since I have a cosine squared on the top, and I also have a cosine squared on the bottom,
There's nothing
one. We never have just nothing. We always have, if you cancel everything out, you have one. So you don't just leave it blank, put a one. Okay? And that's it. Alright, so what if we had, sine over 1 minus cosine squared? Well, aren't we going to do the same thing? What is 1 minus cosine squared? Think about this equation. If you brought the cosine squared over, minus this over here, what would 1 minus cosine squared equal? Squared, yep, because if you brought this, if you move this over here to this side, it'd be 1 minus cosine squared, and all you'd have left over here is sine squared. So sine squared equals 1 minus cosine squared. These, that one in the box and these two are the exact same equation. So when you see a 1 minus cosine squared, you're going to think of that as sine squared. So now we have sine over sine squared, which we can cancel. Well, there's exactly 1 over sine, yes. Because on the top you have nothing, so that's a 1. And then on the bottom you have an extra sign. Okay? So now what I want you to do, I think that's a lot of practice. We just did. What you need to do now is memorize your things. You need to memorize. So why don't you, do you have some paper? Can you make some flashcards for yourself?
Yeah, I do.
All right, why don't you do that? Just you need 8. And make some flashcards for yourself and start practicing those.